Welcome to another episode of my Wake Up Call. This is the podcast where I find out a little bit about my guests, and I want to say finding out a lot more about them for the podcast. And, uh, I'm fortunate because I think of the more than 500 episodes I've done, uh, I only talk to people who are up to all good as opposed to people who are up to no good. I And so that's part of my screening process. And that's why I'm so pleased and honored to have Luke Russert on. He's the author of Look for Me There, Grieving My Father, Finding Myself. It's already a New York Times bestseller. It's an exploration of finding himself and one's place in the world in the face of crushing expectations and grief. He's an author, Emmy Award-winning journalist who served as an NBC News correspondent from 2008 to 2016. And he was primarily covering American politics, and he was seen on NBC Nightly News today, NBCnews.com, and MSNBC. And he was a rising star, but he was told by former House Speaker John Boehner, you might not want to stay in this in this industry. And I'm guessing it's because John, like many people, really just thought the world of Luke's dad. And so with that, Luke went on this trip. After leaving the media, he went on a 3-year, 6-continent travel expedition that took him to nearly 70 countries. And and the book is a reflection of his personal internal journey across all those external places. And he joins us now from Washington, D.C. I can't see his pug name. I can't even. King?
Giacomo.
Giacomo. There you go. Wait. Giacomo, what's the game? What's whack-a-mole? Is that the thing where you knock some?
That's whack-a-mole, yeah.
Whack-a-mole. So Giacomo.
Yeah,
So thanks for joining us, Luke. And so talk to us about this journey and your decision, and what was going on inside, because you were well thought of, following greatly in the footsteps of your dad. I don't know if he would have said, "Get out, Luke," but
right.
But yeah. Talk about your decision to go on this journey.
Well, it was a long one, and I think it's important to start out where it began, and that is we're coming up on the 15-year anniversary of that day, which was June 13th, 2008. That's when my father passed away, and I was 22 years old. 3 weeks before, I had just graduated from college. And a few days after my father passed, I was giving a eulogy and looking out over pews full of John McCain, Barack Obama, Nancy Pelosi, Joe Biden, Ethel Kennedy. So it was quite, shall we say, a maturation process in a very short amount of time. And I ended up following in his footsteps into the news business. I gave a public eulogy at the Kennedy Center memorial for him. That was seen by a lot of people in the TV business, and they thought, well, you got the last name, you have Tim's twinkle in your eye, go out there and report on youth issues, and we'll find a place for you. And I was not naive. I knew there'd be charges of nepotism, and I knew it was going to be very hard work, but I felt a duty to preserve my father's legacy and to keep it going. And so I threw myself into that. But in the process of doing that and having an accomplished career over the course of 8 years, ups and downs, but overall getting to a place where I was pretty solid. And I don't feel it's egotistical to say that. And certainly I had an upward trajectory. I realized that I wasn't fulfilled, that something was off, that there is an anxiety that came in the morning, that some days I would feel different pulsations, that I was uncomfortable in the role. And what I came to realize is that I didn't necessarily know who I was independent of my last name, independent of Washington, D.C., independent of my parents. And I felt that I had lived so long for others, and I didn't really know how to live for myself. I didn't know what I was about. And I started to have these thoughts. And then you referenced the conversation, which was totally organic. House Speaker John Boehner saw me in the hallway of the Capitol one day. He goes, "I want to talk to you. Come by my office." And I thought he was going to be angry about coverage, because oftentimes politicians will pull you aside and they will complain and say, "You got that story wrong," or "You were too hard on me. This is what really happened. Do better," etc. And I walked into his office and he said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "Well, you invited me." And he said, "No, what are you doing here? What are you doing here in Washington, D.C., on Capitol Hill, and in this media bubble, and in this kind of endless cycle? There's always a next election. There's always a next bill that has to be passed. There's always going to be something here that you can justify as being worth it. But is it worth it for you?" And it was a question that served as a catalyst for those thoughts that had been in my head, which was this discomfort. And I wrestled with it. I knew that leaving the position would be seen as odd. It would be seen as crazy. It was almost to some degree a repudiation of my father or my mother, my family, etc. But I realized that no matter what was going to happen, I needed some time. That I needed 6 months to a year minimum just to get away from the world that I knew and try to look inward a little bit. These voices in my head that had said, "Is this really what you're all about?" had grown louder as I had aged and got close to 30. And I think because my father died at 58 and I lost a friend at 27, the light at the end of the tunnel was a little bit brighter for me than it would be for most folks that age. I used to think that was old too back then, not anymore. But once that happened, I started to travel, and I had a wonderful experience over the course of all these different countries and picked up bits and pieces of culture. And I reviewed some of the journals that I had kept over the course of that time. I was going through a tough period in 2018. And as I reviewed those journals and as I started to write, I realized I was doing two things on this journey. I was looking for something, and that was the acceptance of being my own person, independent of dad, and almost his permission for that. But I was also running away from something, and that was grief. And that was actually processing the grief of losing him that I had never done. I had thrown myself into work. I had thrown myself into duty because in my own mind, I thought that if I processed that grief, then he would really truly be gone. And I didn't want to face that. It was easier just to work through something and think I was going to be fine. But the truth is those thoughts become very heavy, and it's hard to hold them, and it's hard to manage them. And ultimately they rear themselves, whether it's through, there's so many times I thought all this anxiety that I was feeling was related to the job or sort of family stress. And some of it was, but a lot of it was related to grief that I just didn't want to face.
So unpack what you felt when you finally pulled the plug, when you told the news agencies, I'm leaving."
Yeah.
And unpack when the first leg of your trip, was it on a plane, a car, and you were just saying, "I'm really doing it. I don't know where I'm going. I don't know what I'm going to discover." Uh, can you unpack those two events?
Sure. So I had wrestled with the decision for a long time. And my father had always taught me that when you have to make a big decision, it's good to pull out a legal pad and sort of write the pros and cons and everything in between, and sort of really flip back the pages and look at it and read it and feel it. And so I did that. And every single time I filled out the legal pad, the pros of leaving outweighed the negatives of staying. And I got to a point of where I said, okay, I gotta go. I gotta go. And it's gonna be hard. It's leaving the only world I've known, but ultimately this is gonna be healthy at the end of it. And what I realized is that it was the first step into what travel actually teaches you, which is to find comfort in uncertainty. And if you can find comfort in uncertainty, then you're really well positioned to handle a lot of what is thrown your way in life. So my first moment of really feeling this was I had left the job and I was inspired by the book Travels with Charlie by John Steinbeck, where he drives around America with his dog and has conversations basically with his dog. And I had never taken a solo trip before my entire life. And I was 31 years old, and I took the pickup truck my father had gifted me when I had graduated from high school. And I took my pug at the time. His name was Chamberlain. He sadly jumped into doggy heaven a few years ago, but we went and drove around Maine for a week to 10 days, and we saw the entirety of the state. And I write about in the prologue of having this moment where it's deep in the rural woods of Maine, and there's a few weeks before the 2016 election, which is just getting so much attention. And I find myself in a place where there's no radio signal, there's no cell phone reception. It's deep in the woods on a road in a working forest. So the only other thing you see is a timber truck occasionally. And I pull over with the dog, and it's this incredible, peaceful freedom. And I find myself yearning for that. And I go, okay, it's in this location that I'm finally starting to think about everything that's happened to me and who I am and what I want out of life. And it's just these things that had been uncomfortable, which may have bubbled up before. And I said, I don't have time, I have to work, or this is silly. I started to be much more conscious and in processing things. And that was the beginning of a very long journey.
So can you expand on I started to be conscious and and what that was like? Because when you were in the bubble in Washington, it's very transactional. It's a transactional place, and it's and this I can just picture you there in the woods of Maine and with your dog. And were there moments when you were just kind of overtaken and just broke down and just crying, a combination of relief, a kind of discovery, or were you just very calm, or what was it?
Oh, it's everything. I mean, I write in the book about there's moments where I notice that I'm processing grief, which I had not noticed before traveling. And those moments would make me cry because I'm feeling dad. I'm missing dad in those moments. But I think a lot of it's just a certain calmness. And one of the things I write about is that, especially in Washington, but you see this all over, there's this hamster wheel that you're running on consistently. And when you're fully in it and you're very mindful of what society is dictating as important, it's very hard sometimes to jump off or even to look inward for a moment. One of the things I write about is the other component of turning 30 that was difficult was I saw friends getting married, getting mortgages, taking on this next level of seriousness. And the sort of they had just cycled right into the next part of life. And I knew I wasn't necessarily ready to do that, but I also knew that I kind of hit a pause button. I was like, wait, what's going on? What's going on inside? And I think now, one of the things that is scary to me is the way in which technology has such a hold that it's become harder and harder for us to get into our own thoughts and get into our own heads because there's constant distraction, or we can constantly feel a need to respond to a notification, or this idea of being busy, perpetually busy. But when you unplug and you truly get to a place where you're comfortable being alone, and there's a certain power to aloneness. It allows you to focus on uncomfortable feelings and not be scared of them. and know that they're going to be there. The Buddhists call it embrace the suffering, right? That we often see in life. And I learned that along the travel and just in the journey. But to get there, you have to go against, I think, what your brain is. Your brain wants safety most of the time, right? And so safety comes in certainty. However, if you become comfortable in uncertainty, I learned you get to a place where you can start to really unpack the things that might be troubling you or might be difficult. And once I got there, it became, I just got really curious about that space. And seeing that sort of those moments play out across the world as I learned more and more about society, but also myself.
So, when you unplugged from something, I have to do something.
Right.
And can you talk about the pain of the maybe even the disorientation? Because there's a certain pain in becoming disoriented, because what used to orient you was the schedule, the next thing, whatever you're chasing after. And can you talk a little bit about if you went through feeling disoriented?
It's a great question. And I think it starts out actually when my father died. I think one of the reasons why I threw myself into the work so hard is because it was something that was defined. It was something that I could do. There was a beginning and the end, and that felt good. You know, one of the things that's very difficult is when you are a proud son and you spent your entire life trying to make your dad happy, your mom happy. There comes a point when one of them dies and you have to reflect and you think, did I do that for them or did I do that for myself? And that's a hard thing to struggle with. And what I mean by that, I had this conversation with a friend not too long ago, is I worked so hard in high school and college to get good grades and athletically. And I had a moment in my 20s where I thought about that. I go, wait, did I do that for me or did I do that just to make dad happy? And ultimately, as I aged and as part of this journey, I came to the realization of that was dad teaching me the ways of the world, to be a productive person, to be well-rounded, to learn things. And so it was definitely wisdom. But when he died, and he was my guiding light, who I'm followed through the gates of hell, right? It was a major shock because suddenly I did not have that person charting my course for me. I had to do it myself, my path. And secondly, what I did find when I stepped away from the commitments of work and the onerous and very tedious schedule is that there is that moment of just relief, like, aha. But then you have to find your sort of groove, that I call it. So some people say it's active procrastination. So, all right, today I'm going to clean the garage and today I'm going to make sure the house is all put together. But the way I sort of approached that with travel, it was booking the trips and then also journaling. And journaling became something that centered me. It gave me an ability to process the events of the day. And this stream of consciousness that I had ignored before, I put into the written word in journals. And that was something where originally I actually didn't review what I had written. I just sort of put it down and put it away. And all right, let's start the next journal. And then I started to review what I had written. I go, huh, that wasn't all crazy. There's some stuff in there that was quite interesting, quite illuminating. And I realized the power of doing that, that putting down just little bits and parts of yourself every single day is quite valuable.
Yeah, I've kept. I dropped out of medical school twice, probably for untreated depression.
Yeah.
When I finally finished it after 6 years, I took out a journal, and I wasn't a writer, I was a doctor. And my first journal entry was, I can't believe I made it through. They've released the crazy person. And that was 1976.
Wow.
And I'm up to volume 257, 45,000 pages, 9 books. And I don't know if it saved my life, but I keep doing it. But it's a way of, and I'm just running this by you to see if
Sure.
you're,
Sure.
it's it's a way of just expressing if I saw something, I thought something, or I felt it, it was worth writing down, even if I didn't look at it again. One of my problems is all my journals are illegible. I'm a doctor.
Yeah.
I mean,
Right.
it's doctor scrawl. It's like, I don't even know what
Right.
it means. But I think what would happen is I'd notice something, I'd put the date and I'd have some sort of a heading with whatever I scrawled. And then, over time, there would be dots that would connect. Oh, geez, I seem to be interested in that. But for me, it was mainly an expression because I I had grown up in somewhat a judgmental home, and so if I expressed myself, it could be questioned. Well, why are you thinking that? Or what does that have to do with anything? And
Sure.
so I think what happened is when I finally made it through medical school, it was just a vehicle to express myself without any expectation. And now, some things will turn into, oh, well, that sounds like a blog. Maybe I'll write something. But there was something about expressing freely, even free from my own judgment. And maybe there's a little bit of a Buddhist kind of experience
Right.
about that. But can you relate to any of that?
I can. I think there's two parts of that. One, I'll start off with I have some friends that can sleep on airplanes
Mhm.
and they can disengage from the world very easily and very quickly. And I envy their ability to do that. And they're very content and they're very happy with where they are in life. They can sleep on an airplane and they're comfortable and they're relaxed. I'm not like that. I can't sleep on an airplane. It's very hard for me to do that. And one of the reasons why is I notice a lot of things, as you were mentioning. And before, when I would notice things, I would internalize them and just hold them down and perhaps store them away somewhere in my head and come back to them. But it would always be swimming around consistently. After I began to journal and began to write, I would notice things and put pen to page, and that transfer was calming. It was a sort of what I saw that was up here went out down onto the page. Did it pass through, or was it put in a way that was better organized, better, perhaps? And I spoke to a friend of mine. We had this conversation, and for him, he takes a lot of pictures on his phone. And by taking those pictures and then going back and looking at the pictures, and I took a lot of pictures while traveling, but it was a wonderful way of sort of saying, hey, this time last year I was doing this, or this time last year I was doing that. And one of the beauties of all the pictures I took traveling and combining them with the journals, I was really able to relive those moments. And
Hmm.
I've found real comfort in reliving moments, even some that are not pleasant. And the reason why is I think when you do that exercise and then you realize that you're okay on the other side, that you're okay, you've made it through, there's great comfort in that. And it's difficult to explain, certainly not for everybody, but for me, journaling and getting those thoughts to paper, and reviewing them even if they're uncomfortable, it's very powerful, very powerful.
Yeah. Where are you in the spectrum of being able to surrender control versus being a control freak?
It's a good question. um I would be probably more on the side of control freak, and I have been known to drive people crazy by wanting to drive the car more often. But it's interesting because there are moments where, and this is again something I credit to travel, where I give myself up to the universe, knowing that there is no way I have control of this given situation. I used to be frustrated for an airplane delay. What am I going to do about that? Right? Um, Traffic is still frustrating to me, but I've grown more calm in it because, again, very little. Most of that is outside of my control. There's very little I can do. I think where I try and control things is, for me, I've always had this desire for punctuality, and my control manifests itself in being on time. That's something I feel like I can control most of the time. And if people are late, or something got thrown off and I'm going to be late, that creates some sort of anxiety. Like, for example, before I came down and sat with you, I checked my schedule like 5 times, make sure, okay, it was right at this set moment, right? And double check. So if the travel did something for me, is that it made me mindful of these things, and where I can have some ability to control the outcome, and there's other times where I just must give myself up.
I want to share an anecdote with you because these are conversational and
Yeah.
so and something I would love to transfer or give to you. I something and it doesn't happen all the time, but sometimes if I'm in a setting like in the airport, I can look into people's eyes and I can know exactly what they're feeling. I can know that they're preoccupied with something. I can know that they're hoping to meet someone. I and I find it fascinating, that awareness, and in some way comforting, because it's like, and I'm not intruding, I'm just observing, but it gives me a sense of really being in touch with the world. Mark, you're in touch with humanity, and and there are times when I'm just locked in, and it's and I don't think I'm hallucinating. I mean, I might be, but it's so revealing. Now, part of it is as I was a suicide prevention specialist, and for many years, and one of my mentors was one of the pioneers in suicide prevention, and he would keep referring me all these suicidal people, and I was fortunate because I was supposed to go into some fellowship that fell through when I finished my psychiatry training. And so I just figured, well, maybe I'll open a practice, and I have some people who refer me things. And what I noticed with suicidal people who weren't necessarily looking into my eyes, it's like they were screaming out to me, "You're checking boxes and I'm running out of time."
Interesting.
Because there was that conflict. And if I had been in a fellowship or worked for an institution, I'd have to check boxes. I'd have to follow protocols. I'd have to make sure. I'd have to ask. And I don't think I was rogue or a danger. I mean, I would ask, the usual questions. But the point is, I would look for the hurt. And with that filter, I mean, if they're seeing me, I know there's hurt. It was always there. And when I picked up the hurt, I would look at them with a look that basically said, "Take me wherever you need to take me." And it was kind of like keeping them company in the dark night of the soul.
Yeah.
And if and when they felt. So I just surrendered to wherever it took me. They'd start to cry because they didn't feel treated. They felt seen. One of the things that triggered it is I think which forced me to do it. I was at UCLA and I was paged to okay an order for a man to be his arms and legs to be tied down because he was pulling at the IVs. He was on a respirator. It was in his neck, and he was pulling at things, and he was sort of kicking at the railing. And the doctors called me and said, okay, the order for the restraints and the antipsychotic, And I went in the room, and his eyes were as big as saucers. Mm. And he was screaming at me with his eyes. And I said, what? And he'd go, I said, what is it? And they'd say, he's psychotic. But I felt he was saying something to me. And then I put a pencil in his hand, and his hands were tied down and he just scribbled something. And so I thought, well, they're probably right. He's psychotic, but he was just looking at me. And, and I said, we've put your hands and legs down because you were pulling at the IV, you were kicking at the bed, you were pulling at the respirator. And we've given you something to calm you down. And then when you feel a little bit better, and you will, we'll take everything off. So about a day and a half later, they paged me and they said, Mr. Smith called us to page you. And he's off the respirator and he's sitting up in bed and he's, And so I go into the room and he looks at me and he grabs onto my eyes with his eyes. And he seats me in a chair. He says, pull up a chair. And he wouldn't take his eyes off mine. He was like this. And he said, what I was trying to tell you and the other doctors is a piece of the respirator tubing had broken off and was stuck in my throat. You do know that I will kill myself before I go back there again. Do you understand me? Yeah. And he just grabbed onto my eyes and my eyes watered up and I said, I get it. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Yeah. But I think that was the breakthrough moment. And I realized that people are always communicating something with their eyes. And I'm just sharing it with you, maybe something to help yourself to be aware of it and make it in a free-flowing way. I have this book, by the way, behind me on listening, and I've spoken around the world. And one of the things I've been trying to teach people, I spoke in Moscow about 4 or 5 years ago with Daniel Kahneman. He wrote Thinking Fast and Slow. And when I spoke to the audience, what I realized is everybody is always listening for something underneath their listening to you. Listening to you is transactional listening. But if you can let go of control and just be curious with a beginner's mind what they're listening for, just the act of knowing it's always there and just being curious about it, it switches the dynamic. And I have a video clip of it which I can send you. And I said, if I focus on you listening to me, I'll give you a bunch of bullet points. You'll write them down, and none of them will work. And you'll say, well, he's the expert, it'll work for him. And if I'm entertaining and I have a few good stories, you'll give me your mind for an hour. And then I switched to an NPR voice and I said, but if instead of that, I focused on what you're listening for, and I get it without you telling me, and I deliver on it, you'll give me everything. And then I said, I think what you're listening for, let me check it with you, is if you're business people, you're looking for a way to get better, positive, measurable results, because if you get that, you're going to get a raise. Is that true? Duh. And you're listening for a way to do it that's less stressful, because the way you're doing it is you're drinking too much, you're eating too much. It's a mess. Is that true? Duh. And finally, I think you're listening for me to give you something that was immediately doable by you. You don't have to buy a book. I haven't written this book yet. I probably never will write this book. Listening for a way to be able to do this that's immediately doable by you, and you don't have to take a course because you don't have room in your mind to read a book or take a course. And so if I can give you something that's immediately doable by you that will help you get those numbers and it's less stressful, will it have been worth the money you paid and a day of your time to be here? And they went, da, da, da. I said, good, 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 good. I got to give a presentation here. But I'm trying to share this with you because, you might think about it, but just the thought of whoever you're with, what are they listening for? So even now in this conversation, you've done a lot of interviews, they're all a little bit different. But what I'm picking up is what you're listening for is, he's not interviewing me right now. He's sharing something with me. He's pictured me going around the world. He's pictured me continuing to do that. He's picturing me wanting to tune in and find myself by becoming more aware, getting out of my head so I can be in touch with the world and see what the world reveals to me. This is an interesting thing. So, and you can do it when you go out to dinner tonight. And if you look to people's eyes, they're always listening for something. One of the things that I do when I go to a restaurant, they're not just listening or looking for a tip. They're looking to be seen as a human being and not just a function with a name tag.
Yeah.
And if you can know,
now more than ever. Now more than ever, I agree with you on that. Yeah.
And if you can know that, and you can even sort of say, how long is your shift?
Yeah.
They have a name tag. How's your day been? And you just say it as an act of caring and kindness. You're going to notice that their eyes change because you've converted them from an appliance and a function into a person. So I hope it's okay. I'm sharing this with you, because I don't travel anymore. I'm a little bit cautious, but I try to live vicariously through all my guests.
Well, I appreciate that. And I agree with you. And I think one of the things I was blessed with, my father used to always say to me is that for people to understand you, you have to speak their language. And I think there's a lot of that's intuitive in reading situations and reading a room and noticing those types of things, putting yourself in that position. I think what you talked about the service industry, especially in this day and age, where post-pandemic, a lot of us forgot how to act in those types of situations, which explains why so many people did not want to go back to work, why so many people thought it was not worth their time and it was too difficult, is especially in the hyper-focused technology world we live in. People forget those things. So I agree with you. And I would try and do that in my interview style when I was a journalist, especially when I was not interviewing politicians. I often said that some of the hardest assignments were going to places ravaged by a tornado or things like that, because I do think it's imperative that you have empathy and you are empathetic through your actions and your voice and your eyes and your movements, whatever it is. Because when people are at ease, I agree with you, they tend to open up more, and honestly, it's better for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So talk to say more about finding myself.
So finding myself, right? That's kind of this uh grandiose existential theme that we always talk about in the world, right? Like, did you find yourself? Did you find yourself? Well, what does it mean? And I like to say that I'm very much still a work in progress. But what I was able to do through my journey and through traveling was I got to a place of peace regarding the passing of my father, where it no longer consumed me, where it no longer was an oppressive weight on my shoulders. I was sad, and I still get sad. I'm coming up on the 15-year anniversary of his passing. That will be a sad day. But I found that he would want me more so than anything to be happy and not be weighed down by pain and anguish. That the last thing in the world he would ever want is for me to carry grief and sadness and disappointment. And when I found that, I was able to find more of who I was, independent of that great burden that I felt I had carried for so many years. So I was somebody who is more adventurous than dad. You know, dad was very risk adverse, grew up in a very parochial family where no one really rocked the boat too much because there was stability, you gravitated towards it. So I like to try something different, which was all that travel, in this case, writing a book. Do I sit back like the Buddha or Yoda and have all the answers to everything? I do not. But as it pertains to me, not carrying the weight of losing dad has been incredibly rewarding and has allowed me to go forward and be my own person. And what I do next, which is I like the storytelling space, and we'll see where it goes, but I'm not afraid of that. And that's what I found is I'll go where things take me and where I want to chart my own course. And it's okay if I fail. It's okay if it's not exactly what dad did. It's okay if I still needed some time to figure everything out and it's not perfect right away. And I found comfort in uncertainty in that respect. So that's my own version of finding myself, is that it's an acknowledgement about being a work in progress. And it's acknowledgement that I'm not Tim, and that's okay.
Do you ever allow yourself, or do you ever have the experience of having him talk to you, and tell you and say, I'm so glad you're adventurous. I'm so glad that you're exploring things. To whatever extent I was a negative role model about be risk averse, I'm glad you're breaking free of that. And go take some chances for both of us. I mean, do you ever have things in which he's speaking to you and guiding you? Again, he's not telling you what to do. He's in his mind, he's saying, I want to do travels with Luke. tell,
yeah, yeah.
tell me what you're noticing. What'd you notice today, Luke?
Right. No, it's a good question. It took me a lot of years to get to that space where I was able to talk with my father. And right after he passed, a close family friend said, you can talk to your dad every day. He's there. Just listen, be aware, get yourself into that position in that moment. And I write about in the book, I was in Zimbabwe when a coup happened there. And the longtime leader of Zimbabwe, Mugabe, was being deposed. And it was scary. There wasn't violence where I was, but no one knows who's in charge. And there's a certain chaos that's involved. And I immediately called my mother, and she was a journalist for Vanity Fair, and she had been in war zones before. So she said, just maintain your wits about you, just try to get information about what's going on. And I called another friend of mine who was in Zimbabwe and said, it's probably a good idea to get out if you can and see what's available. And so I ended up calling the guy who had given me a ride to the airport before. And he was like, "Oh, my cousin's a police officer. Let me talk to them to see if the airport will be open and what roads are going to be open." And so ultimately, there's some moments of anxiety, but through communication and being calm and rational, I was able to get out unscathed, and it was okay. And I thought about that a lot in the moment because there's a few things that came to mind. One is that old me, as in the guy who worked at NBC, would have been calling up the American embassy and saying, "You got to evacuate me. What the hell is going on?" Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I knew my father, had he been around and thought that I was in the middle of a coup in Africa, would have turned purple. It would not have been good for him. He would have worried a lot. But I realized through that experience and through that moment that I was pretty okay on my own. And I was pretty well, I had the toolkit inside of me to handle the situation. And I never freaked out. I remained calm. I got some advice from people that I trusted, and I ultimately was willing to be trusting to what was going on with someone who could be helpful. And I look back on that, and it marks, at least for me, a real shift. And what I mean by that is, hey, not to go out and explore, not to see things because you're so worried about something, is really it really keeps you isolated to a degree and in a box, and it's ultimately really no way to live. And I think about how my dad would process that, and I think that over time, especially after he saw that, I made it through 67 places relatively unscathed, that you say, "Hey, all right, you got a good head on your shoulders. I trust you to do the best you can," and that's important. And I think now, when I have those conversations with him in deeply meditative moments, um, I'm very open about the person I've become, which is not exactly who he was, but I think he'd be okay with that, because one of the things that he used to always say to me is, "You can do whatever it is you want to do. You don't have to follow in my footsteps, but whatever you do, just keep your honor, laugh hard, and study often." And yeah, pretty universal, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Years ago, I remember I was seeing a patient, and she had a much beloved, larger than life father, and she was his favorite, and she didn't know what to do. She was lost,
Yeah.
and he
Yeah.
died at a relatively young age. And then one day she came in, and she had a smile. She was peaceful, and she said, "I think I'm better." And I said, "What happened?" And it was just the turn of phrase, and she smiled and she said, "What it comes down to is living with life never being the same again.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean uh, it's over. I can laugh, I can love, I can get married, I can do whatever, but it'll never be the same again because he's not here. And the future I might have been counting on that I won't get to have, well, it's a future I'm not going to have, but it doesn't mean my life's over. It just means it won't be the same as what I expected if my dad hadn't died." And I just thought it was just a wonderful phrase, life, living with life never being the same again.
Yeah. And that's the comfort and uncertainty,
Oh yeah.
for sure. And the other thing I like to say is, you may never move on, but you can move forward. And it beats suffering in silence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So getting back to what you're going to be doing in your life after the book, you'll do the book tour, you'll do
Yeah.
whatever. Any thoughts about what you want to be doing next?
I like the storytelling space, whether that is another book or podcasting or documentary film or long form pieces. I think that's where I'm comfortable and where I enjoy the work, and it feels like it gives me uh, meaning and it's purposeful. So I think that's probably where I'll be. But what I've learned is that it's one of those things where you get to that place on your own, because a lot of people will always tell you, you got to do this, you got to do that, and there's some well-meaning advice in there, but ultimately, for to be comfortable and to be successful and to feel fulfilled, it really has to be something you believe in. And so I think that storytelling space is where I'd like to be.
Have there been any uh, tricks or techniques that you've been able to apply in your head about, I think this is what I want versus what I should want versus what other people tell me I should want, or whatever? Have you discovered any ways to be able to say, I think, or this feels like what I want?
It's a good question, because one of the things I often struggled with, especially in my 20s, is people would come up to me and said, "Oh, we loved your dad, and you need to be just like him, or you're going to be just like him, or we expect a lot out of you." And that never sat right with me. You expect a lot out of me? Why? Just because I was born to this guy? And I remember, one of the things that my father used to always preach was, to whom much is given, much is expected. And I often thought about that in a professional sense. But ultimately, what I realized from a lot of meditation and a lot of reflection was that what's expected is being a good human being,
Mm-hmm.
that is enough. And that is something that has brought me great comfort. So what I often say to people is that there's always going to be a weight on the scale of, do something for financial reasons, or do something for powerful reasons, or do something for legacy reasons, or whatnot. And look, sometimes that's the right decision for people, because that is what motivates them and that's what gives them a sense of purpose, and that's okay. But for other people, it's not that. And it's more along the lines of, okay, does this bring me joy, or will it also allow me to wake up in the morning and feel fulfilled and not anxious? And am I doing good by society? And what I mean by that is, am I not hurting others? I'm not hurting myself, and I'm giving back in my own little way. And I think if you do that, you've done a great job.
Yeah. Something I've discovered that I wish I'd discovered when I was younger. Uh, I'm fortunate. I get to see my 4 grandchildren every day. They're 4 and under.
Beautiful.
Yeah, and I wasn't geographically close to my grandparents, so I didn't really know that experience. And uh, and something that I'm doing with them, and they'll come over to the house, and I'll race home after this our interview so I can catch them there. And I'm not included in any of the conversations. I mean, look, I'm my daughters and my wife are talking about the details of this, that, or the going to this preschool or this meeting, and I have no idea what they're talking about. And the children will be playing and interacting with each other, and every now and then they'll look at me. And I've done this experiment where initially I could be upset. I'm being ignored. I'll just go somewhere else and catch up on my whatever, my email or something. And then I said, that's pretty crappy. That's kind of what my dad would have done. And then also I noticed that my daughters could be multitasking at their phones, and the kids could be looking at an iPad. But if I looked at my phone, everybody would give me the stink eye.
Yeah.
What are you doing there? So I realized I'm not going to look at my phone. But I would still be thinking about, I wonder if I have any messages. And again, I'm being ignored by everyone. I mean, I'm not doing anything wrong. But then I happened upon something where I'm just going to be there. And on the occasion that my grandchildren look at me, they're going to see utter delight with nothing else other than utter delight. And so I'm just there, waiting for them to make eye contact. And when I bathe them in utter delight, they take a second helping. They'll be doing something and they'll take another one. And when that's happening, I feel it's probably the healthiest that I feel psychologically, because there's zero ego driving the show.
Sure.
And I'm beginning to think that if you can do that with people out in the world, if they can pick up that you're actually delighted to see them.
Yeah.
Very few people feel enjoyed in their life. A lot of marriages end not because you stop loving each other, it's because you stop enjoying each other, or you stop feeling enjoyed by the other person. So you may love each other, but you don't feel like you're liked by each other. And so I'm just sharing that with you because it's when I can empty my mind of everything and have someone look at me, and I can just bathe them with utter delight. And I think you can do that with a look of thanks to the cashier. So I'm just sharing it with you because it's kind of
it speaks to something that I think is important as well, though, which is a sense of honest time, right? And that's one of the things I was very blessed with my father. So as busy as he was, he really did give me the gift of honest time, which was focused on me, not in a sense of you must do X, Y, and Z at this moment, just one-on-one. Let's stare at the clouds for a second, but that's okay. But I'm right here next to you, and I'm interested in you. I care about you. And he did that with my friends too. And that's why when he passed, they were almost as sad as I was, if not more so, because that was an adult figure who, since their very young age, had always sort of just asked, how you doing? How are things going? Right. So I agree. And I think your phrase about bathing someone in other delight is very true. Especially as we veer into this AI world, this tech savvy world that we're in the beginning of.
Yeah, absolutely. So, where can people find out more about you? I guess they can find.
Sure. The book is called Look For Me There. There's a website, lookformethere.com. Instagram is at Luke Russert. Twitter is at Luke Russert. But lookformethere.com, the title of the book. It's a wonderful website, put a lot of heart and soul into it. It includes a lot of the pictures from the travels that I took. It has some travel tips if you're interested in how to travel the world or solo travel. And all my contact information is there. Lookformethere.com.
Right. And to our listeners, if I was listening into this, and I am kind of listening, but if I was, I'd want to follow Luke. It feels like he's on some personal journey that would be relevant to me. If you're listening in, finding yourselves, and he's certainly piqued my curiosity for what he'll do next, what he'll discover next. So I really would encourage you not just to check out the book and the website, but to follow him.
Thank you very much.
I think you can trust him to not hurt you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's a wonderful compliment. Appreciate
that. That's why I was looking, after I saw you on the last word, I said, oh, wow, yeah. I've got to spend some time with him. So thank you to our listeners. Please share this with other people. and give us reviews. Tell us how we can do a better job to better serve you, and take care of yourself. And when wake-up calls come your way, wake up. Don't beat up on yourself. If you miss the first wake-up call, there'll be another one. They're like buses. And until next time, be well.